Hi all. A very important question for the 1d4 player is handling some of the key defences available for black. One of the most popular in recent years has been the Gruenfeld defence, which Garry Kasparov successfully used to defeat on a number of key games Anatoly Karpov in key World Championship matches. The top Super Grandmaster to employ the Gruenfeld defence is actually Peter Svidler. He plays this defence, Gruenfeld defence, very often. Fabiano Caruana met Peter Svidler in round 6 of the FIDE Grand Prix 2014. Let's have a look at what happened and see if we can glean any ideas for an anti-Gruenfeld system. d4 was played. Peter played knight f6. After c4, g6. And in all likelihood, if knight c3 was played here, Peter Svidler would play the Gruenfeld d5, which is a major exponent of. Personally, and to be quite honest, I've always thought the Gruenfeld is a bit like often nannying the white pawn centre. Black is given a very clear strategic idea to build up pressure on d4, and not only that, there's an isolated pawn here, and often you're just passively having to make sure your centre is not going to fall to bits. In recent years, and this goes back to even key candidate matches like Kramnik against Shirov. There's been an idea of making the Gruenfeld player stumble by not playing knight c3, by actually playing f3. So potentially it's inviting a Simish kind of King's Engine defence, which is okay if you like playing the Simish against the King's Engine. For example, d6, and we could transpose into a Simish King's Engine like this. There seems to be less motivation for black here to want to play d5, but this is the most popular move in any case, to play d5, even though there isn't a knight to take on c3. So this is a new kind of trendy main line. C takes, knight takes, e4, and now usually the knight goes to b6. So this is far less trodden territory than the main Gruenfeld territory. It's an anti-Gruenfeld weapon of choice. Now knight c3, and you can see the pawn structure is more intact than usual. And in fact, it also seems as though the knight's a little bit odd there. If white builds up, white can actually afford to castle queenside, which is unheard of in normal Gruenfeld type positions. We see bishop g7, bishop e3, and there's a kind of playing against the Sicilian dragon feel to this, that if white fianchettos with this structure, it's almost as if, yes, this h-file attack, it seems, is this too easy to be true, to be believed? Well, black did castle, and that is the main move, and white did actually play queen d2. So for the d4 player, this is an interesting attacking position to put into the repertoire, really, if there is a clear attacking plan. And note, the knight is not near the king. King safety has in a way been compromised, so it seems a ready-made plan of going for the king. So what's the downside? What's the catch? Well, black's normal c5 here, it seems unplayable. White could actually just take that. There's no real compensation here. King takes d2 might be the strongest, and just white's simply better. This just shows that the normal c5 plan is out of the question. So what does black actually do here? The main move is knight c6, putting pressure on d4 just for the pieces without using the c-pawn. White usually castles. This is what was played by Fabiano. Now usually the most popular move statistically seems to be f5, with 97 games from this position in my live book, or e5. On f5, some games have carried on like this, where black wanting to get that d5 square. So interesting battles from this position, and there's interesting prospects, I think, for both sides here. The engine has this position as roughly equal. Actually, black could even play an outrageous looking move here, a knight sack potentially, which white shouldn't really take. So that's one idea, to play this in this position, to play f5. Another idea statistically which is used is e5, and for example like this, with f4 trying to undermine the knight on d4. And this position is very interesting as well in its own right, where white seems to have a small edge from an engine perspective here, challenging these pieces on the dark squares. And I think there's still some attacking prospects in sight, so that could be a sample game continuation. What was played in this game is interesting. Third most popular move, Queen d6 with 66 games. So what's the idea here? Black potentially is maybe the useful move Queen b4 is going to be played. That's one idea, or reserving f5. Let's see what happened. King b1 is now played. White might have been tempted to kick the queen there. This next move suppresses that with a6. So what if white had kicked the queen? I think it might be fairly harmless. The queen just drops back to d7. And then in this position, say here, black can strike with f5, trying to get that d5 square. If white plays e5, then this looks quite comfortable actually for black in some respects, but still it carries dangers. It's a slight advantage overall to white. This bishop has been blunted really. The centre seems quite secure. So okay, instead we see king b1, not making use of knight b5 for the moment. So that's suppressed. And with this now, black might actually be playing for rook d8 or queen b4 again. Now here is a seemingly crude move which a lot of club players would love to play, just to go for the king, h4. Yes, it looks as though white's playing it like a Sicilian dragon. Rook d8, but the centre needs to be attended to here. There's no way white could carry on without the centre falling to bits, without any compensation really. So d5, well, little compensation. d5 was played. The knight actually goes to e5. Another interesting choice here, and it looks as though the knights are eyeing c4. Another interesting choice was actually knight a5. That's interesting. Here, white could consider a move like h5, and if here, white could take this, and this is interesting for white as well. There's an interesting dynamic going on for attacking prospects. But okay, in the game the knight went to e5, and here actually Caruana inserted the move here, very very interesting, against this knight c4 business, either knight going to c4, either the b knight or the e knight. Very logical move, it seems, very powerful for what it does. Queen f2. You might think it's a simple case of gaining a tempo with bishop c5. In one respect it is, but if we have a closer look, for example, knight ec4, bishop c5, queen f6, white can actually play here to reduce this pressure on this diagonal. Bishop d4 is very very useful to play, which would really encourage e5. Anything else is not so hot here. For example, this, we can actually, this is a loose piece. A disaster is about to happen here. Bishop takes, and the loose piece on c4 is exploited like this. Ouch. Queen d4 check. Nasty pin, end of piece. Ouch. So black has to be very careful in this position. Any queen f4, then again we can take, and here again this might be a very strong move. Bishop takes. Okay, queen d4, there's knight e5, but again this is still a very pleasant position for white here, with prospects like h5 has with it ideas of, you know, kicking the queen away from e5, and other ideas. It's quite dangerous. Also queen c5 just to attack these pawns potentially. So a very very interesting move. So in the main concept though that I ought to mention there, here, if e5 is actually encouraged, then the bishop has done its job. It's closed up that diagonal, and after bishop c5, black is with less counterplay. The position is safer. This knight can be kicked back, and white can more freely carry on with his kingside attack after. For example, here bishop e3 with prospects of even bishop g5 coming up, but with that diagonal closed, that seems to be a key point of queen f2 in this line. Very very pleasant position indeed. with black having minimal counterplay. So okay, so queen f2 has a lot of venom to it. And just for those interested in this as an anti-Gruenfeld system, could that have actually been played here? Queen f2 in this position? No, there's a slight difference, it seems. There's a slight difference. The bishop hasn't been covered by the knight here. There's actually bishop takes c3 in this position, which might indicate, on closer theoretical analysis of this game, that knight a5 might have been a more accurate way of playing it, to reserve bishop takes c3. This could actually be quite dangerous for white. His king safety has been compromised. There's some prospects here, it seems, for black to investigate in any case. So that's very interesting, that it seems Caruana has picked up on a very key nuance of the position, this bishop being temporarily blocked from bishop takes c3 possibilities. It does seem as though this is outrageously strong, stronger than it should be, in inverted commas, in this position. It just so happens that it does support a very key and useful forcing move, bishop c5, with potential reverberation to d4 to encourage black to shut down the centre and the diagonal. Okay, so Peter Svidler here played the move h5. And we get this bishop c5. In any case, it's very, very useful to have that mechanism. In any case here, if the queen went to f6, if the queen goes to d7, then again bishop d4 is strong, with the idea of g4 taking to use up the g4 square like a composition, like a weakness for the last move, to play f4 to rob black potentially either of the important bishop, or to try and literally just win a piece through some tactic of bishop takes c4 and queen d4 combination. So that would be exceptionally dangerous, this position. Black actually, Peter Svidler put the queen on f6, and we still have now bishop d4, with still this very tactical idea of g4 for black to use up the g4 square, to follow through with f4. Pardon me. So, as an example, just to demonstrate this tactical idea in this position with this pin, say a token move, just to demonstrate the idea, g4 takes f4 is winning a piece in principle. Okay, so very dangerous position indeed here. Black actually played queen d6. Right, so here now the idea is still made use of to deprive black of the g4 square by playing g4. So it's threatening to rip apart black's king, that g file. So black takes using up the g4 square, and now f4 was played. Knight e to d7, and now a seemingly quite risky move was played. When I say risky from an engine perspective, it seems this next move e5, it seems to strand the queen and basically force a piece sacrifice. If queen b4, for example, the queen is being run out of squares here. It seems very, very dangerous, and actually white can actually carry on with h5 very strongly. So this looks very unpleasant. There's all sorts of ideas like h6, and just to give an idea of the pitfall of the position, taking here, stripping open the h file, bishop d3. Yeah, black's king safety seems to have had it here, with the queen not really able to get full support for doing anything too dangerous. So white is now in a position to start attacking. Say this continuation. This looks potentially quite crushing for white, with even the h file being available. This looks very nasty. Black's getting blown to bits in some of these lines. So it doesn't seem very good to try and play queen b4. That it seems the other parts of the board are being neglected. So black here does have the opportunity for a piece sacrifice on e5, and that's why I think some commentators are indicating this is risky. everyone with engine technology is indicating this is where black seems to be in better shape than before. So this piece sacrifice is played, but if we look at this position, it was better for white. I think the point is that knight ge2 here is looking absolutely great for white with minimal risk. White is still pursuing h5 in this position. What does black actually do here? It seems a bad statement, indictment of the Gruenfeld if this is the new kind of start position, where the h-file is a bit like a dragon, Sicilian dragon h-file, full of huge risk. So, what does black do here in this sort of position? If, say, bishop takes d5, I mean, what else? How do we arrange the pieces? What do we actually do here? If e5, let's say e5 takes h5, this is approaching real danger levels of just taking here and opening up the file. Say knight c5, we can connect the rooks to protect d1. Black's eventually going to have to give up that bishop, and this sort of attack seems very, very strong. So I think that's why in annotations of this game this seems a bit dubious to play e5, giving black the opportunity for a bit of counterplay and the use of the f5 square for the knight, for the bishop rather. So after the knight takes e5, an interesting piece sacrifice, f takes, bishop takes. The engines have this position as only slightly better for white, even though white's a piece up. Is that really the case? White now connects the rooks and protects more d5. Black gives up the bishop, bishop takes d4. Rook takes d4. I think this is stronger than queen takes d4. It might be, or it's about the same. They're both pretty strong moves. White's a piece up here. With knight ge2, there's some dangers approaching as well. The black king, still with h5 for example. Black played bishop f5 check. And in this position, it seems as though, with white having good prospects of simple moves like knight e2 and knight ge2 and h5, it seems as though black should be going downhill, even if the engine has this only a small advantage for white. What does black actually do here? He played actually e5. If he plays c5, then rook f4 might be interesting, or rook d1, with h5 to follow, and a rampant attack. Black actually chose the move e5 here, kicking the rook out. So the rook went here, and now knight c4 was played with an idea perhaps of queen b6, looking at b2 and also the queen. So black might not be too afraid of a queen exchange here. He's got some pressure going on in the position. But white now proceeds with the attack h5. We see queen b6. And let's see here for a moment, queen e2 was played, keeping the tension in the position. If the queen's got exchanged off, apparently this is okay for black, potentially, after c takes b6. Even though white's a piece up, I think there's some ideas for black, like knight e3, which have to be addressed. So say here, I think the point is this knight hasn't maybe got too many immediate opportunities. If say here, then there's knight e3. So it's a bit of a tricky position actually, and there's also this knight c2 business, which is not trivial. So it's a bit awkward for white to actually develop here with that pawn on g4. I think this is the point where it starts to look a bit strange. Although it's a piece up, this is a bit of a bad position in many respects. And if white tries b3, okay, to get rid of this knight e3 nuisance, this position seems to offer black a solid looking position. He can even actually accelerate an attack over here by ignoring that as an example. f6, and in fact it seems from an engine point of view this position is actually better for black, rather strangely. It's a strange position to assess, but white's king safety has been compromised. I think that's really part of it, that black is actually getting to be much better here. This knight is a big problem. The disconnected rooks are a problem. So I guess that can help explain why Caruana maybe saw some of this, and he keeps the queens on. He attacks the knight, keeps an eye on b2 not to be mated with queen takes b2. So knight e3, still a nuisance move. Technically, apparently, rook c1 is good for addressing the knight c2 tactic, but rook d2 is okay. It seems to be about equal here from an engine perspective. I think it's to do with this knight being in prison at the moment, this awkward king g7. But here, things start to unravel a bit after bishop e4. Black, in this position, played rook h8. And after rook h8, the engine evaluation shifts dramatically in white's favour. But if we look at this position objectively, white is not without resources. This knight is not totally a dead piece. I want to demonstrate that with some variations here. So in the game we see rook h8, but if bishop takes e4, let's go with bishop takes e4 as an example. Knight takes e4. Perhaps black's best is actually to play rook takes d5 here to take off that d pawn. This might maintain near equality, but white is a piece up. Rook takes d5, knight takes, queen takes. White's got some attacking targets here. This position is still dangerous for black. So hg coming up. For example, here, piece up, maybe exchanging off queens here is not so bad, with white being a piece up. So the check. But also, if we look at this position, if rook takes d5 isn't played, say f5, trying to use the pawns. This is interesting, knight g5. It seems as though black could be getting into serious trouble if he doesn't play super accurately here. Perhaps the best move here would be queen b5. Challenging the queen there. This might be just about palatable to just offer that exchange sack. It seems a very tricky position to actually assess. Queen e1, rook d3. Yeah, I think the chances of this improving for white are better than improving for black. If black is not very careful here and plays, say, g takes, then here this is actually a great attacking resource to be sacrificed potentially with the move, and this is quite shocking now. This move here. So white is now if this takes, then queen takes. We've got multiple threats: knight e6, queen f7, queen h7. This is quite dangerous. For example, like this position, black is busted. And you might think, hang on, is just ignored? Let's just ignore this one, not to allow queen takes h5. It's very dangerous. Say here rook d3, knight takes. It starts to get dangerous there. Queen takes e5. So now there's some interesting possibilities coming up. And if ever g takes here, then we've opened up that g file. So the knight on g1's not totally dead in these lines. After bishop takes e4, knight takes e4. What does black actually play if he doesn't play rook h8? So this f5, knight g5. I mean, queen b5 might hold the balance though. There might be some other moves making things difficult for white. I think queen b5 might be one of the best moves here. So in that respect, it seems the major turning point of this position, from an engine perspective, is rook h8. It seems white's having an easier time of it, technically. So why would this be the case? It seems like quite a natural move to defend against some possibilities like h6 even, or this h file. The rooks are connected after all. Isn't this a pin on the h file? What could be more natural than to pin the h file here? Why is that a mistake? Let's see. Rook d3, gaining a tempo on the knight, a very important tempo. The knight goes back. For example, if the knight didn't go back, it wouldn't help. Bishop takes, well, the knight's going to go back anyway here. We can kick the knight again. And then e5 becomes the target here. Knight g3, we're threatening e5. For example, like this is dangerous. Now we've got things like queen b2 check. Okay, so after rook d3, the knight goes here without taking on e4. It's kicked again. The knight goes to d6. And now actually, it looks good to take on f5 just for the point of view of the e5 pawn, if nothing else. But is that the actual intention? Because doesn't this diagonal rebound on the white king if we go taking on e5? Well, actually, bishop takes f5 was played. Knight takes f5. So here, what is going on? Why can't we take on e5? In the game, the much more powerful move, it seems, was played queen takes g4. If we take on e5 here, this might actually be okay for black, it seems. I know it's strange to say. Piece down, but queen f6 is tricky. This is a tricky position. If taking here, taking, knight here, taking here, we've got a lot of pawns here on the king side against nothing to stop those pawns in the long run. This could be some prospects here for black in sight, and that e file looks good. Black seems to be in a very good shape here with the pawns as compensation for the piece. It looks as though it's definitely 3 pawns for the knight. It's good compensation. Maybe black's on the verge of being better now. Black's actually better here, better prospects. So that's not the idea to take on e5. And you might think, well, hang on, surely there's another option after queen f6. The thing is, if we move the queen here, say, okay, that knight's pinned. Rook takes h5, and this is okay for black as well. This sort of position, black is looking pretty. Nice pin there. Threat of rook c8. It's awkward. So Caruana's move avoids all this. It's a great temptation to play queen takes e5. But again, he doesn't want the queens off the board. It seems black will have ample compensation in form of the pawns. He actually takes on g4. So what's the venom behind this? Well, one principal idea, we're pinning that g6, so rook f3 to take on f5 is pretty crude. Black actually stops the idea completely of rook f3 by playing e4, offering another pawn, and not necessarily to get queen f6 in, because there's knight takes e4 to stop black using the f6 square. Now, if black didn't play this, it seems actually here, whenever black plays, he's actually worse now. Black has 6 pawns here, white has 4. It's 2 pawns for the knight. The knight, though, has been given a lease of life with these 2 squares and this one as well. It's got nice squares to develop to. What does black actually do in this position if he doesn't play e4? Say rook h6. Let's say for the sake of moment rook h6. Knight ge2, rook a h8 using the pin on the h pawn. Here knight g3, so we're threatening knight takes f5, knight takes, rook takes. This is dangerous. If rook takes here, then black is losing the rook to this one, that pin. So that safeguards the pawn here basically. And if something like this is annoying. Queen c8 check, queen f5, and white is celebrating the g6 pawn being pinned, threatening rook f1 now on the cards. So say king f8, we can take here now very safely. This is dangerous. There's dangerous tactics for black waiting here. 2 rooks for the queen would be good here. This is good for white. This position, a lot of material for the queen. So it does seem dangerous if e4 is not played. It seems a bad position here. But after e4, clearly it's now, you know, white's got the 4 pawns, black has only got a pawn for the piece. Only 1 pawn for the piece. Rook a e8 is played. And now the knight simply retreats to e2. Sorry, no, it doesn't retreat to e2. That would be dangerous, potentially. This knight develops finally. It finally moves, the one on g1. And with that, Peter Svidler actually resigned. I think it's just fascinating positionally just to reinforce its friend on e4. It's a huge knight on e4. I guess if this knight, this is asking for trouble, surely, with rook e1 check. It's just asking for trouble. There's no need to allow this. This position, black's getting a little bit back in the game, for example. There's no need to allow that. So very carefully just playing knight e2 to reinforce the knight with knight e2 to c3 soon. So say here, we just reinforce off the knight d6. It's fairly hopeless. It's a piece up. It's a piece up for white. This position, it's just bad. Bad news. Anything really here. h7. Even knight f2. Just have the exchange of queens. So yeah, after knight e2, black resigned. I'm just going to delete the remaining moves there that were added. Bit of a strange game, because if you look at this from an engine perspective, it seems as though annotators will be saying as though the move which forcibly basically wins a piece, e5, is risky in inverted commas. You'll get this a lot about this game. Yes, I guess it is. That knight ge2 is a testament to the strength of white's position. That it seems horrible for black, this position in any case, which actually spells the fact that this might be a great anti-Gruenfeld system. We're playing against the guru of the Gruenfeld defense here, Peter Svidler. If this is the position a Gruenfeld player can hope for, this is not a very nice position. So for this to win as well is a testament to the strength of white's position. The knight on g1 was a major concern in the variations here, and black's apparent counterplay here. It just seems, yeah, black was trying to get this knight e3 resource to embarrass white potentially. So queen e2, just avoiding the exchange of queens. It seemed like the way to go. And just carefully evicting that knight back on e3. Carefully, carefully. Now rook d3, asking the knight to step back. Black's being pushed back, and white is not going for the e5 pawn with that queen f6 resource available, but instead going for g4, taking a pawn, this pawn back. And this g6 pin is very, very significant for the attacking player here. Very significant. So white is just building up an attack here, it seems, with knight g2, rook f3, menacing threats. So e4 giving up another pawn. Yeah, so only 1 pawn for the knight, and this knight is now free to move. Yes, Caruana is playing very, very accurate chess, and the positions he's reaching seems to be being underestimated by the engines, it seems. e5 was forcibly winning a piece. This is a piece up with attacking prospects now. What a game. Okay, so here we have it, a system which we can all potentially use against the Gruenfeld defense, starting with the early f3. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.